not available or if they come in late, we will have this recorded. We'll get it posted up on our webpage at some point within the next week, and we'll have it there and people can review it when they're ready. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to come and share with us in this experience. We are meeting for the fourth quarter of fiscal year 23. Most of the LEAs in our state are wrapping things up and getting ready to close shop for the summer and start a new year. And hopefully we're going to be ready for them. So we'll start with our, let's see, agenda. Ta-da! Here we are. Everything from the beginning. And this brings me. Okay. So we are going to go over some news, CTED updates, 21st century. These are the things that we saw earlier this year that were added, the Office of Indian Education, some updates from Exceptional Student Services or discipline data, and then something looking forward from the Office of Digital Teaching and Learning. There were some neat updates, which are no longer updates, but I still left them in here because they were part of our agenda before. And changes to the post-secondary concurrent college program, the PCCP, and some Group B funding that is changing for this year. So our news, we do have the UAT server available. The address is here, it's UAT REST API R9. We do expect to have the fiscal year 2024 production server rolled out on June 1st. And there is going to be an outage from the portal from 5 to 8 p.m. on May 31st. Most of you should have received a notification to this effect, and some people were with it enough. They noticed in the notification it mentions Saturday, and May 31st is a Wednesday. So May 31st is the correct date. The outage will happen between 5 and 8 p.m. on Wednesday on May 31st. And then Thursday, June 1st, we expect to have the production server up for next year. The 23 production server will remain open through July 15th. After that, a 915 process would be required to be able to change data. And we added this in here because I just wanted to stress this. It is not suggested that LEAs do complete synchronizations if they have their data submitted. So each year we usually have a small school district or sometimes a charter, charters are frequent, that will try to do a mass resync on the last day of AzEDS closing. And some of their data does not make it back up. It will be deleted and not restored. So that will leave them with a lot of missing ADM that they had a week before. So once the LEAs have their data submitted and they're happy with the data, I would recommend not doing any mass synchronizations from that point forward and just try to tackle any small issues that they're seeing if they're reconciling before the end of the year. The good news, I wanted to start with good news. Maybe I should have saved this for last. Well, there really isn't any bad news. So the good news, our CTED status update, looking at the data that was available on January 11th, which was before we made the change, and this last weekend on May 13th, we have the data looking here for all of our CTEDs, and it looks like we're down 19% of the ADM, which is not too bad. The nice thing is, if you notice, about halfway down, there's one that's increased 118%, and at the bottom, there's one that's gone down 82%. These two are the outliers. Obviously, for native, they simply did not have their data in accurately beforehand, and now they do, so that's a good thing. The only LEA, only CTED that is struggling right now was WestMech, and they are the last CTED to be submitting all of their data for all the satellite campuses. And there's been kind of a breakdown in communication there, which is the reason for this. So that's kind of the positive thing. If we were to take those two out of the picture, then we actually have a 1% increase in all of the ADM across the state before and after this change, which I think is absolutely remarkable. I'm just really proud of all of you guys for being able to make the changes that happened. I do expect that WestMech is going to get their data submitted, and I think we'll have everything taken care of. But to me, these numbers look absolutely beautiful. Tim, do you agree? Are you on the same page?
Yeah, I think it's looking very good, looking very strong. We can get WestMech's data in there. I think we're going to be very nice.
Great. And the dates that you see here, where you see January 11th, if you were to pull this data, it would actually be showing on the 12th, because this is the 11th was the date of the data capture, but it processes overnight. So it's always early. And there's a 7-hour difference because we're using Greenwich Mean Time, Universal Time Code. So it will show as the 12th or the 14th of May if you were to pull those data for them. The issues that we have for WestMech, we did have a meeting with them. They pulled together vendors and their member districts, and school finance and AzEDS IT were together. And it's pretty clear that the issue they are having is that their satellite campuses, they don't have the data for that. So they're working on that. They did have a misunderstanding about how to add up the time for CTED courses, and this was something that was a surprise to me. There are students that have more than one CTE course and they want to mark them both. That's just a foreign concept, because most of the time the satellite campuses are only looking for a 0.25 FTE, and I wouldn't expect them to be reporting more data than that. But those were questions that came up and things. So the nice thing is next year, WestMech is expecting to move to the EVIT model, which all the other districts are doing. So the member districts will submit their own data, and that'll solve that problem that we've been facing this year and look much better for next year. So I'm really optimistic about this. Anyways, with those changes, the one thing that I wanted to make sure of is that the guidance that we have is to ensure that the CTED memberships are singular per student. So instead of separating them like in the fall and spring semester, which happens frequently, we need them to be posted as one membership with a start date of the first day that they participate and an exit date of the last date that they participate. And then there would only be one entry for putting in the instructional hours, the planned instructional time, or the community college or college credit hours, if that was the case for anybody taking a community college course. Our next item, the 21st Century Community Learning Centers. The activity code is the new piece that we added this year. The activity code is designed to be a unique identifier for each course. So if you have multiple STEM courses, which is activity 02, then you would be able to identify which course is this student in or the other student in. And the problem we were having without the activity code is a lot of these courses would take place at the same time. So we're not able to differentiate that there were two courses being offered when there are, and it looked like there was only one course. So that was the purpose of the activity code. Most of the people that I've heard from are using a section number to put into the activity code, and that's fine. Just anything that's unique to the class would be great. The 21st Century Community Learning Centers are currently looking at standardizing this activity code, not for next year, because you guys have had enough changes as it is, but possibly in the future. And one of the things they've got another report that is being completed by each of the schools participating. Here's a sample of it. And if you notice at the bottom, it's listing all of the different courses that the students are participating in. And there's a lot of data here. So the idea is that the values over here off to the right are already covered with the program participation attendance. You will know which days they're being offered. We know how many students are participating. We can calculate the average participation. So that data could be figured out simply because you're submitting that participation for the students. And that leaves us with this other side over here that we might be able to use the activity code and include some of these items. And that would allow this report to no longer be needed by the LEAs. And so that was one of the things that they're looking at. And some of this data may not be necessary, like the class name and activity. That might be a nice to have rather than a need to have. Or maybe the same thing is true with the measurable objectives. We'll see what they need. But if there's anyone that would like to participate and have some input into the standardization of the activity code, which again, it's not for this year, it's looking into the future. You're welcome to reach out to me or to 21st Century, and we'll get you in touch with the people that are going to be looking over this over the next few months and half a year maybe. And we should have some kind of answer by next November when we meet back for looking at 2025. So what we're expecting. Okay. Also with the teacher survey, we've had some of the vendors ask a question about what is to be populated for the external evaluator element that's inside the JSON. And that external evaluator is a field that's part of the model, but it's not something that's being implemented for the 21st Century Community Learning Center teacher survey. So you may have that omitted. It's not necessary to include external evaluator. The idea was just if this model was needed where you were using somebody outside your agency, then you'd be able to report them. Though we're not doing that. These teachers, the staff members will be reporting results. So we'll have that. For the Office of Indian Education, they added the is enrolled flag, and now tribal affiliations have the ability to mark an is enrolled flag for anybody in their tribal affiliation, but there may only be one per student. You can have 6, 7, 8, as many tribal affiliations as the student may have, but only one of those tribal affiliations should be marked as is enrolled, and there will be an integrity error for that. So we want to make sure we have the one tribe that they're marked as enrolled, and then the others would not be. If you do have any questions, because the tribal affiliation for the LEAs could vary, like the is enrolled requirements with each of the different tribes, because they have their own sovereignty, the Office of Indian Education would be able to help with guidance on what's required for the particular tribal affiliation if needed. The more difficult piece was the exceptional student services needs. We have the ancillary needs and program L, which was a new program. So one of the questions we've had includes that with the least restrictive environment, it's actually the program L. Belonging to a student who's not on an IEP, what do we need to submit for the Education Organization Responsibility Association? So that field is specific to students on an IEP. And since that the students on an LREL are not on an IEP, the EdOrg Responsibility Association will not be submitted for the time of the LREL. If a student has an IEP for part of the year, then they will need it for that part of the year that they have an IEP. But we're going to make adjustments to the business rule 40050 to make sure that you don't fail anything for not having the EdOrg Responsibility Association. Additionally, the fields for the SEPA, the Student Special Education Program Association, will be null for a student on LREL. That's like the IEP begin and end dates. And since you don't have that for students that are on Program L, that data will be insufficient. You don't need to post it. And using the Student Program Association would be sufficient for submitting LREL, Program L. The other question we had is, when does a student have LREL? And this is the requirements. The LREL is for students that are not on an IEP that have one or more of the following services. And they include physical therapy, occupational therapy, orientation and mobility training, and the sign language interpretation services. So if they've got somebody coming in to work with them on one of those 4 items, that's where the LREL would come into play. May any SPED need be listed as ancillary? That was a really good question. And the answer is actually no. So there are a finite amount. There are 10 of the Group B needs that are allowed to be listed as ancillary. So they include things like autism, orthopedic impairment, hearing impairment, severe intellectual delay. But these are the needs that we have that are eligible for is ancillary. Another question we have is that LREL listed some services that were required. Are there any ancillary needs for students on an IEP? So that was not necessarily for LREL where you had the physical therapy, etc. When do you use this for a student on an IEP? And yes, we do have things. In addition to those ancillary services for LREL, so if you're on physical therapy, that could apply even if you have an IEP. But also if a student on an IEP requires a full-time aide to help the student, then that may qualify for an ancillary need while on an IEP. So they would still have other needs that are not marked as ancillary, but there could be an is ancillary on some of the students. It's important to note that ancillary needs may not be identified as a primary SPED need, and not all programs or LREs may have ancillary needs. ESS Data Management has a meeting coming up tomorrow, I believe, with the LEAs across the state, and I think they may be sharing that information. If not in that meeting, we'll make sure we get that provided to everybody before the start of the school year. For the discipline data, originally discipline data was being submitted for the ESS students. That grew. We have a need for the 21st century community learning centers to also collect discipline data. What they were looking for is anything that results in an in-school suspension action. And that would be for the schools that are participating in 21st century. We also have the firearms behaviors that are to be reported regardless whether they're an ESS student or not. And what we're looking at in the future is that all discipline data resulting in an expulsion will also need to be reported. The reason for that is there is some federal reporting on students that are expelled from school, and there needs to be some identification whether those students that are being expelled, if they're receiving their educational services outside of the normal education environment, or if they're not being provided those services. And there is going to be some kind of guidance to clarify what that means for students that are on IDEA, which is pretty well documented with an IEP, but also with non-IDEA students as well. Something also looking forward in 2025, the Office of Digital Teaching and Learning is hoping to be able to collect the internet and broadband home availability. This is coming out of the EdFi standard where you've got the Student EdOrg Association. The LEAs will collect data at the time of enrollment, so we'll provide them with a form or a sample form that could be included on their enrollment packets and would allow them to collect the data that could then be entered into their student information system and reported to AzEDS. The AzEDS will have this developed during the year. It's not going to be a requirement until 2025. But once in place, we will update the use case. And this would be an advantage for especially the impoverished districts. The reason we're collecting this is that Office of Digital Teaching and Learning is able to provide some financial backing to help support students that do not have internet broadband home availability. And if you are in a district that doesn't have the funding, and so parents may not have that availability, those districts would probably want to take advantage of getting that data in. It may be difficult to collect mid-year instead of with an enrollment packet. But if it's in a pilot year and only one district is the district that gets their data submitted, AD is going to be looking at that district quite favorably when they look at the entire state and they only have data that's limited to one needed area. The elements that come with this, there's an internet access in residence. That's either a yes, no, it's a flag. And then there are descriptor IDs for any barriers to having internet access, or the internet access type, and their internet performance, whether it's kind of spotty, if it works regularly, they're able to do their work or not. So this is a new element that we'll be looking at in 2025. It's not a requirement next year, but just wanted to give you guys a heads up because we do hope to have it out during the year next year. And if you've got districts that are impoverished and things, then it might be an advantage if they could get that data in next year as well. Not a requirement though. The needs update, this was the element. We were looking at a possibility of modifying unaccompanied youth to just be under an umbrella of homeless need. And that would have required a lot of work and changes, but the decision was made that we're not going to make changes to unaccompanied youth requiring it to be under homeless. The current implementation of both homeless and unaccompanied youth is that they require a primary nighttime residence. Those are the only needs that should have a primary nighttime residence, and there is an integrity rule that looks for them on any unaccompanied youth or homeless need. The unaccompanied youth is kind of a special case of being homeless. So if you have that unaccompanied youth, then you don't necessarily need to submit an additional homeless need at the same time because it's implied in there. Actually, under the McKinney-Vento, it's defined unaccompanied homeless youth. And that's what we've got looking there. A surprising change, the PCCP data that's going to be submitted, we're looking at making changes at this. So for those of you that are not aware of PCCP memberships, these are for students that are attending a community college or Arizona Board of Regents University, such as NAU, U of A, or ASU, Arizona State University. And those are the only ones that I believe are overseen from the Arizona Board of Regents. It is also intended for courses that are offered beyond what the high school offers, which kind of implies that dual enrollment is not PCCP, because if you've got a dual enrollment class where you're teaching it at your school, then it's offered at your school, and it doesn't quite meet the definition for PCCP. But what PCCP is if you've got, say you offer Calculus 1, first semester calculus at your high school, and some student is in there when they're very young, say a sophomore, and then they want to take Calc 2 and Calc 3, they may go to their local community college. And this is where PCCP comes in, is that those students would be able to have a membership and submit their data to AzEDS, and they could be funded for that. The prior use was to send a membership type C at an applicable college, and we were using the STC data, and funding was based on a course transcript. This was pretty complicated for all intents and purposes, and what we're looking at to making a change is to be able to send the membership, the type C, at the college and include the credit hours with the membership in the total enrolled college credits field that we had added for CTEDs. The catch is for this PCCP membership, that field is actually college credits that are passed and not just enrolled. So at the end of the year, they need to make sure that all the college credits that are marked in there are college credits that were earned, that were passed. And if that changes, then they need to make a change in those hours that they're submitting. But we'll be able to take those community college credit hours and generate funding based off of that. And it'll be a lot simpler than going through and building all of the STC data for the community college. We have two other Group B funding weights that are being added. The first one is the free and reduced price lunch. This is one that's going to be added during the year, fiscal year 2024. There's quite a bit of work involved for this one. The nice thing is there is no efforts required by any of the vendors. This is based on one of two different things. The first of which is the membership days for students that have an income eligibility 1 or 2 need submitted. And the second is a percentage of regular ADM for schools that take part in the community eligible program, which may not be submitting the income eligibility 1 and 2 needs. And whichever one is greater for the LEA is actually, it's at the school site, but it's funneled up to the LEA is the calculation that'll determine that free and reduced price lunch funding source. The last item we have is our gifted Group B funding weight, which is going to be added also in fiscal year 2024. We're quite ambitious this year. Again, the nice thing, there's no efforts required by any of the vendors. The students that are eligible for this have to have an appropriate need. So that would include a quantitative giftedness, language arts giftedness, or nonverbal reasoning giftedness. If they've got other giftedness, then that's not something that's fundable under the statute. And I put a little asterisk there to mention that ADE does have requirements to list a gifted need. I believe the requirements in statute are something like the 98th percentile on a norm reference test. Is that correct, Tim? Back me up on that.
Okay, Monica just verified for me it's 98%. So we'll just go around the tree here till we find somebody who knows what they're talking about. 98, right. Yes.
Yeah, perfect. So that's what's going to be required. I know there are some schools that don't have very many students that are gifted, identified as such, and some of them are trying to come up with different criteria. If they set up a new criteria so that their students, maybe they need to be 90th percentile and they want to put them in gifted, that's fine for them to do that, but it's not fine for them to submit that data to the state. In order for that data to get submitted to the state, those students would need to meet that 98th percentile in order to have the quantitative giftedness, language arts, or nonverbal reasoning giftedness reported. The other piece too is that students eligible for funding must have a gifted program. So if you are in a school that's comprised of all students are gifted and no one's actually in a unique program, I don't know if there's any funding for that. But you have a school where there is a gifted program, and Peoria Unified School District, they have Project Ideal. In the Alhambra Elementary District, many years ago when I used to be there, they had Super Challenge, which I think was actually sued for the naming rights, and they had to change it to something different, but that's a whole nother story. So that if there's a gifted program and the students have the gifted needs, the overlap when they're in the program with the need is going to be the measurement of days that will be fundable for that student. So if they are in the gifted program without a gifted need, that's not going to cause an error. There are many parents that ask their children for their children to be put in gifted programs, and I think that's actually a admirable thing. If the students want to rise up to the challenge and move forward, that would be great. But unfortunately, by the statute, those won't be fundable because the student has to have that gifted need and in the gifted program. So that was the last thing in there. That does bring us to a close, and I'm gonna bring this to ask if there's any questions from anybody. I'd be happy to take those.
Yeah, hi, this is Brent Galloway from EIP Pro. Can you hear me, or my microphone's still not working?
Absolutely, Brent. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, maybe I just wasn't talking loud enough. So yeah, I did have a question, and I'm coming from this from more of a technical standpoint, and the people at EIP Pro on this are a lot more SPED knowledgeable than me. But my question was on, so the new API resource that's in that 414 use case doc that's required for SPED submissions, I believe it's the AZ Student Education Program Association Assessment Outcome.
Yes.
My question is the expectation that the required data submitted to that new resource API be submitted at the time, say, a SPED need and program is submitted, kind of similar to how that responsibility association resource that was added a few years ago works, or is the expectation more that that would be submitted at, say, the time of enrollment, say when a student school association is created or a student program association is created?
That is a good question, and our resident expert for ESS is not with us at this moment, but I will get back to them on that and let you know, Brent. The thing that I do understand from that element is the assessment is primarily for the preschool students. Is that correct?
It probably is. I'm looking at the use case now, but I'll let the SPED experts know more.
And I believe, yeah, they have a data that comes in when the student starts and when they leave, and then there is some acknowledgement whether yearly progress was made, or adequate progress was made, I should say, for that student. But when the timing of when that data gets submitted is something that I'm not privy to, but I will certainly research that and find out and get back to you.
And we can follow up with email as well, because I guess my question, really, when I look at that new resource API, some of the required values is like a assessment period descriptor, which looks like it's either entry or exit. And so I guess that may answer the question, is that kind of the IEP dates that are entry exit, or is it the program association entry exit would be more specifically the question?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I would suspect that the answer to the question is not necessarily the IEP or the program dates, but the actual testing that's been done to make that assessment.
Okay.
Because I think they would want the actual dates for that, but we'll dig into that and find out what we can get back to.
And not to dominate the call, but so one more question I had. So looking at the use case, so the understanding is that that is ancillary SPED integrity rules where those will be in with the FY24. So similar to other transactions where it can go up, be posted successfully, but then when integrity runs, some of those may fail based upon, whether it's the right SPED need is in ancillary and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. My understanding is that they were looking at making the errors into warnings at first so that LEAs could have time to make corrections for things. Okay. But the things that are critical to know is that the anybody on an IEP has to have a primary SPED need, and the ancillary need cannot be a primary SPED need. So there has to be something else for the student.
And I'll follow up with email, but so is that going to be a warning then, or for this FY24, or will it be actually rejected based on integrity?
I think that part, that being a primary need and ancillary, will probably be a real error. I think that's something that they're going to want to make sure that they don't have any mistakes on that. So the is ancillary is mostly for people that have some other, like an aid or some kind of assistance, a compensatory service, which was what that physical therapist might have been, or the sign language interpreter might be there for somebody who has a hearing impairment. But if they aren't on an IEP, say they're not meeting the qualifications for an IEP, but they still need that service provided, then that's where the LREL would come into play, and they would have still have an HI, hearing impairment need, but it would be marked as an ancillary. And it would not be marked as a primary SPED need because it's not something required or causing the IEP to be drafted. Okay.
And one final question, then I'll let the others. So you mentioned that the UAT environment's now up. It's been a while for me on this. Is that similar to our sandbox where everybody has access, or do we need to request specifically to have access to the UAT for this?
Yeah. Chris, are you with me?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I need to request access for normally the.
Yeah. Yeah, Chris is saying that the access might need to be requested first.
Okay. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Joe, you have questions?
Yeah. Hey, Jeremy. Can you hear me okay?
Hey, absolutely. Thank you.
All right. I think I have 3 as well, so I'll throw 3 out there. question one, are we 100% sure for discipline that AzEDS is going to be the system of record in FY24? And, does that mean that the XML-based upload is fully retired as well in FY24?
For the discipline data?
Yeah.
Yeah, the expectation is that this fiscal year 2023 was the pilot year for discipline data, and that fiscal year 2024 will be the actual first year. And I do not believe that they are expecting any more data from outside sources. They want to be able to collect all that data in AzEDS.
Okay, so I would expect probably the XML upload application to be fully shut down next year.
Okay.
This is Kristen
Safe.
in ESS.
Yeah.
Yes, it will be it'll be read only.
Okay. All right, awesome. Question two, also related to discipline. You were talking about, okay, it was only ESS before, but now there's a few more flavors of things that need to be uploaded. CCLC was one of those. And I guess I got sort of a mixed message. So will it be any discipline going on at a site that has CCLC? Or will
Yes.
it be for any discipline for a student who goes to the CCLC program?
So that's a really good question. And I want to be clear about why we want to collect all at the site. So for instance, you might be looking at Peoria Unified School District, and one of their schools, Cotton Bowl School, offers the 21st Century Community Learning Center program. Collecting all of the discipline data for that school site for in-school suspension is needed, because even though the student may not participate this year, they could participate in the following year, and that data is reflected in both years. So as long as they're providing the 21st Century program, it's best. And they also are looking at school-wide data for their federal reporting. But we need to have that, like the data for the entire school. But even though like Cotton Bowl School might be offering the 21st Century, up the street there is another school, Alta Vista, or Alta Loma. Anyway, Alta something. And if that school is not offering the 21st Century, then they don't need to report that school site's data at all. But we do want to collect all of the in-school suspensions that are being reported at any school site that has a 21st Century program participation.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully last question related to CTED. Would you be able to go to slide 9? That might help us talk about it a little bit. I think it was slide 9. I guess I was looking at the little page number. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, back one. Okay, second second bullet item here. Was this bullet item meant to like circumvent people doing a separate like semester 1 record and semester 2? Or are you saying that like even if they had a true interruption of CTED enrollment, would you still only want one record? So like, let's say the student took a CTED course for 2 weeks in September, and then didn't take CTED for most of the year, and then maybe took another CTED course the last month in May. Would you really only want one record in that case, spanning the whole year? I wouldn't think so. Right now, we're programmed to do 2 records.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying. Tim wants to chime in here. Tim, let me take this for a minute, and then we'll get your input too, so we can decide if changes need to be made at this point. But the idea about having it in one membership is to prevent any overfunding situations. And the reason there could be overfunding is when you have 2 memberships, or just say more than one membership. Each of those memberships are going to have the planned instructional time submitted. And let's say you get 120 hours for one and 120 hours for the second one, and same thing for the third one. Together, that would end up generating that fraction of 120 over 160. But if you were to put them together, then what happens to the formula, the way it's in statute, is once you hit the 150 or more, you're only paid by each increment of 150. So getting paid for 120 plus 120, you're going to get paid for 240. But if you have it as 1, then submitting 240, you're going to get only paid for the 150. So it's a practice that prevents overfunding for the LEAs, which is the main reason why we had that established to be one membership. So Tim, you had some input you wanted to give in there as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say if there's no gap in their enrollment, we expect for it to be one enrollment. If there is a gap, like you said, somebody enrolled for 2 weeks and then was out of the CTED for 2 months and then re-enrolled, of course there would be an additional enrollment there. But if it's a continual enrollment, you would want to have one enrollment for that entire period.
Okay, nice. I don't have to change any code then. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's all I got. Thank you very much.
Okay. We have anyone else? Questions? I do see we've got something in the chat. Charles, you most mentioned for internet access reporting, will it be one time? Yes or no? Okay. The question, the answer to that is yes. There's just one data entry, and I do understand what you're saying because things can change. Somebody might have internet on the day that they start, and it might be something that they can no longer provide. If they do make that change and they let the school know, then it could be submitted that they no longer have it. But we're not going to have periods of when they have it or don't have it. We're just going to have a yes or no, whether they have internet access or not internet access. That's kind of the way that the standard is developed. There's not a time period to be maintaining any changes or anything that's happening in there. So if you wanted to measure that, you'd need start and end dates like you're indicating, but that's not part of the EdFi model. Barbara, for CTED hours, if they fall in the range 123 to 150, are you expecting the vendor to round up to 150, or is that happening at ADE? Tim, I believe you had some guidance on this, correct?
Yes, I believe the FAQ says that you should be submitting for 150 hours if that is the case.
Okay, so that is not happening within the system in AzEDS. If they've got the 123 hours, which is required for the entire course, then they're eligible to submit it as 150 hours. And I think there's just, I know this is a little surprise, there's a little bit of ambiguity with the legislature and how they wrote that into law, because they didn't base it off 123 hours for the CTED satellites. They just made it based off 150 and then increments of 150 beyond that.
I'm glad Barbara asked that because I heard that rumor too, and we were waiting to hear back on that issue as well. We calculate this for the users, which makes this kind of tricky. Why not just do it on your end? Why make us? I don't know. We'd almost have to fudge the data, and why not collect the real value and make that 150 assumption on your end? I hate to just make up data like that.
Yeah.
You want me to speak to that really quick, Jeremy? Because I can actually. So the reason is that if you read through the FAQs, it's specifically for a student that attends the entire time, and the class is for 123 hours. There's another question here from Vishesh regarding if a student leaves and re-enrolls, that would not roll up to 150 because it would be two separate enrollments at that point in time. So the FAQ specifically says that the student is enrolled from the beginning to the end, and the class meets for 123 or more hours, that you can roll it up to 150.
Yep, and all data that you have, and it makes our calculation trickier to differentiate between full year or not. Like, how would you even define full year? I guess it would have to relate to the student school association calendar to know whether they were there the full year or not, right?
That would be, yes, you would be looking at the, beginning of the calendar to the end of the calendar. And how, if that student was enrolled for the entirety of that calendar.
Very good. That also answered Vishesh's question as well. Thank you. Any other questions? It's not often we get together like this. And honestly, I like hearing your voices, so. Oh no, our 5-second rules come by. All right, I'm gonna stop the recording. This is going to